Now, I'll take this Japanese scale that we're doing and adapt it to a 5 pattern, like the 5 pattern that we did in the pentatonic scale first. Now, a 5 pattern that we did before was this one. Now, let's use this Japanese scale and use a 5 pattern on that. Now, we're going to take it in the key of B minor. So the root's going to be here on the A string, and let's start with that note and go like this. And so on. Now I'll play it fast first before I go into the whole thing, and this is a passage from the sound page song that I have called Go Off. Okay, and slowly we'll break it up into little sections of 5s like this. Sections of 5. Now, that's just a scale played 5 notes at a time. You can do that with any scale at any time for improvising, and it's nice for worked out things too. Okay, so that's the Japanese scale played in 5. The next thing that I want to do to emphasize exotic playing is show you some different ways to bend notes. Because I find in guitar playing there's a lot of bending, and a lot of guitarists bend very similar. And what I like to do is show you some different ways to bend. Now let's take a passage that would normally get bent like this. So the notes you're actually playing are D, E, and F, and then back to E and D. You're getting to the F from bending the E note a half step. Right? That's the normal way to do such a thing. Now, what I would do in that instance is never play it like that. I would always bend from the E flat note. Because that gives you a little bit more of a enunciated bend. And I think it's really important to bring out the bend. And it sounds a little bit different if you bend from a note that's probably out of your scale. Like D sharp wouldn't be in your D minor scale where you might be playing this particular passage. Now, coming down, you could go like this to complete the melody that we had first. We'd go. Now, to bring it even more into the realms of true exoticness, we can go like this. Now, by doing that, you're taking this note, which is E, and you're bending it a whole step, which, if you're playing in D minor, where you would normally be playing a line like, very common D minor sounding line, if you were to bend that, it'd be completely, out of key thing to do, but just do it for the sake of sounding exotic. And if you plan it and you make it sound nice, it's a good thing to do. So let's show the 2 ways to bend here. We got this. Okay, so that's something that you've got to just do all the time in your bending to get practice with. Okay, now what I also want to do is play a melody and play it straight, and then I'll play it, adding these exotic sounds to it so you can get an idea of how to change something normal into something kind of nice. We have this. This would be the melody normally. Okay, that's the basic melody, and instead of playing it like that, let's kind of exaggerate it a little bit. Okay, if you notice, I took the melody and I just played it completely all weird and messed up. Now what I did is I bent from notes that are out of the scale, just bent from whatever note it took to get to the note that I wanted. Because I knew which note I wanted. So instead of which would be kind of an obvious thing to do, I bent from a half step instead of a whole step, the complete opposite of what I said before. A half step bend there, and bending to this G note, I bent a half step there too. Now that's examples. Now what you want to do is mainly take this one here into mind, because that's a common phrase. Let's go like this for a change. Another thing that I like to do to make playing more interesting and to really communicate feeling into my playing is to pause and rush things and add extra notes. Now, what I say is, like, take a normal melody and don't play it completely in time, you know, just slow down some of the time, speed up some of the time, and really, you know, pause. Now, let me give you an example of what pausing is. Taking the same melody that I used, for example, before, I'm going to go like this. That one, right? Okay, so if I were to pause in that, I could go. Okay, I'm playing the same melody, but I'm just kind of exaggerating. And I'm waiting a little bit. I'm not playing it in time. I'm just kind of letting the beat fall wherever it may. I'm just kind of pausing and digging into it really deep. Now, you can pause things and you can rush things the same way. You can go. And to rush things, sometimes it's nice to add an extra note like I just did. Now, this E flat isn't in the original melody, so to say, but I added it in there and I rushed it along by going like. I added that note in there, and I played it quick enough that it doesn't really sound out of key with the melody. It just kind of builds up to it a little bit. Okay, it looks like this. Okay, so what I did was I added a lot of notes. I paused, I rushed, I bent from notes out of the scale. I did everything all together. Now, those are all things that you want to consciously think about when you're improvising, and when you're writing melodies. Consciously think of how you're going to, you know, bend things differently than just playing the notes. You know, it can be kind of boring if you're just playing the notes, you know. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is go to the next section. And the next section is where I'm going to talk about what has to go through your mind as you're constructing a solo or playing a solo, improvising or working out one. This is something I was faced with, a progression. This is a typical thing that could happen to you in a studio. You'll be faced with a progression to solo over, and I'm going to explain the thought process, what has to go through your mind as you're soloing. Okay, I'm going to play this progression with the solo that I did, and then I'm going to explain what happened on every chord change and what I had to do to make it sound the particular way it sounds. So now let's take a listen to the solo that I'm talking about. Okay, that's the solo, that's the final product. Now, what I had to work with was a progression that looked like this. Okay, those are the chords. Real basic progression, and there's a lot of ways to look at this progression. A lot of guys would take the easy way out and just play in the key of D flat minor over the whole thing like this, and just play like a regular blues scale or a minor scale over it, which could be extremely boring. It could be cool, but I think, myself, I think I'd like to take a much more deep approach. Even though the chord progression is very simple, you can spend a lot of time working it out and getting something nice with it. So let's take it measure by measure and look at what I did, and look at this thought process here. Now, first thing I did was I took, on the first measure, what I played was this. Okay, those chords were D flat, A, and B. And I followed the D flat by starting on the note C, which you might think is kind of weird, but what I did was I bent it to D flat quick enough before you could say, man, he's sitting on a horrible note. But for the split second that I did sit on that horrible note, it certainly caught your ear because the chord is D flat, and I'm playing C like that, so you're thinking, wow, what's going on? For that split second, catches your attention into the solo. And by the time you've heard that, you're already listening to something that sounds pleasant, bending it into the correct note, okay? So I bent it. Okay, that's just a melody straight in the D flat minor scale. And then when the chord changed to A, I went like this. Bending to the note G from F, which you'll recognize from my section before with the half step and whole step bend. Now G and E together over the chord of A make an A7 chord. So I followed the A like it was an A7. So I went. Now I'm bending to the note of F sharp from F. So while the B chord is playing, you're hearing F sharp, which is the fifth note in the B scale. So I'm following that B chord there like that. And then the next measure around looks like this. Okay, the first lick is something I like to call shock. You shock the progression like this, you know. I'm not following any chord with that. It's kind of a mindless sounding thing. It just jumps out at you. It's not following the D flat minor chord or anything. It's just a pattern that looks like this. And the whole concept of this is to land on your feet, and that's what I did in the next line like this, which is a D flat minor arpeggiated figure right there. So what I did was I kind of shocked the ear by playing this really mindless sounding thing. And I landed up on my feet, following the chord with a D flat minor arpeggio. Okay, on the next chord, which is E and B, I did something like this. Now over the E, I followed it like it was a D flat minor. And what I did was I followed it that way because E and D flat minor are relative to each other, so you can generally use the scales of each in the other. So what I did was I pretended that I was playing over a D flat minor chord, and I relied on the flat fifth in the blues scale of that quite a bit, like this. The flat fifth being G. So I started on the E chord. When the E chord came in the progression, I started on the G note, and I did this. Okay, so that's how I followed the E chord. I followed it sort of like it was a D flat minor chord. Okay, and then when it came time for the B chord after it, I only used two notes, which is just A and the note of E flat bent to from D. So over the B chord, all I did was go. Now what you have there is A and E flat, which are the two main notes in a B7 chord, like this. There's your E flat, there's your A. So I followed the B chord like it was a B7 chord. And the next line, I did like this. I totally changed the entire vibe of the whole thing. I said, I'm not going to play D flat minor oriented things anymore. I'm going to play this line, a D flat major sounding thing. Just totally changed the entire, the entire vibe of the whole thing by going like this. Kind of a Chinese sounding thing. And if you look at it closely, it's this figure. The only thing that makes it major is this note right there, F natural. Because if it were minor, it would have E in it. It would sound like this. It would have that sound to it, but I used the major note so I can change the sound of the whole solo. Okay, so that's how I followed that D flat chord. And then on the A chord that comes up next, all I did was play the note A and slide up an octave on the same note. I mean, there's nothing safer than that. Just playing the note, playing the octave of the note. Okay, that's a pretty safe way to follow that chord. And the next chord, which was B, I followed with an odd number pattern, a 7 pattern, like the odd numbers I was talking about before. There's 7 notes in that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that's also a B7 kind of oriented run, and I followed it adding 2 notes that are not in the B7 arpeggio, which is this note, D flat, E. So it's a B7 arpeggio, adding 2 extra notes to it. Okay, so it looks like this. Okay, now the last measure of the progression is this. Okay, now this is something you also want to think about. It's like the end of the solo is coming up. You want to build it up. So you want to do something different from the rest. Not that the rest hasn't been all different from itself, but the end of this solo is got to be really different. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a harmony for the first time in this solo here. And the lick that I'm going to use for this last measure is similar to an exercise that we did earlier in the video. It looks like this. That one. I used that, but this time I used it in the key of D flat minor, because the chord that we're playing over is D flat minor, so I used this. And then I used another kind of mindless sounding lick to really catch your ear for the very end of the solo, which is just this. So that's how I followed the just completely random notes. They don't necessarily follow those chords. I just used something that's going to really, you know, stand out. So I took a chance of playing completely out of key, and I liked the way it sounded, so I left the solo the way it was. Now, to harmonize that, I took the obvious harmony for an arpeggio, and the arpeggio being minor, D flat minor, I took the major relative chord, which would be E major, and I arpeggiated it the same way, using the same variations on that. So it looks like this. Here's D flat minor, and here's E major. That's the same arpeggio variations as I used in the D flat minor one, but moved up into the E major key. So it looks like this. And for the mindless part, I just harmonized it from where I was, the same fingering, same phrasing, everything. So that winds up being 3 frets higher than where the original line was, so you get kind of a minor third feel over that whole thing. And that's a pretty safe harmony, not too outside, but the note choice is so weird that, you know, it comes out sounding pretty weird, and it builds up to the end of the solo nicely. So that's the thought process. That's what you got to think about all the time when you're improvising. You can't just play exercises, and you can't just, you know, just solo in one key and think that you're doing something different. You got to really think about every chord and make the best out of every chord, because it gives you a chance to show something different. You know, it gives you a really chance to play. So always follow as much as you can and really think it out, because if you take a little time, you can get something really nice. So that's generally what I want to say. Try to sound different. Try to really think. I think the main thing that you want to do is think, you know, because if you don't think and just let your fingers repeat exercises or repeat licks that you've learned, that's only half of what you got to do. It's a lot more than just dexterity. Being fast or being able to play clean is just, you know, it's just part of it. I think even more important than both of those things is to be able to play creatively and to be able to, you know, say something with your guitar. So what you have to do is really think all the time, and think like every note counts, because it does. So that's it for now, and thanks for looking at this video. I hope that you learn a lot from it.